Greetings, Disney adults, Disney fans of all ages, and welcome. Today, I want to talk to you a few minutes about IP. Now, IP, if you're not familiar with it, stands for intellectual property. And what it means is the stuff that you have the right and the control over. Now, since we're talking Disney, and specifically the Disney Company, the Disney parks, that means we are talking about all Disney films or all Disney-owned films. At this time in history, Disney has a lot of IP. Star Wars, owned by Disney. Avatar, Pandora, owned by Disney. There's a lot of things that are owned by Disney. But for purposes of illustration, let's just go back to the big five. Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, Donald, and Pluto. Basically, owning that IP means Disney can use that. It also means that if I choose to open a restaurant or a store or some kind of attraction on my own, and I choose to call it, say, Donald Duck's Playland, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to use Donald Duck's likeness in my park or in my attraction or in my shop or whatever I choose to open. Disney will come find me and say, you have to stop doing this. So that is what it means to own IP. Now, for the Disney parks specifically, we are talking about attractions mainly. And we're specifically talking about attractions that tend to be based on movies. Because that's what this episode of What Would Walt Think is going to cover. What would Walt think of the use of IP in the parks? But as we always do, before we do that, we've got to go back in time. So join me. Let's go back in time. We are in Disneyland, and it is about 1960. Why did I come back to 1960 Disneyland? Well, remember, Disneyland was open in 1955. Well, when it opened in 1955, there were some attractions that had not opened yet that later would become very popular. There were other attractions that were kind of rushed in for opening day, for the opening day, that really didn't last very long. So I figured, let's give the park 5 years. This is about 5 years after the park's opening. It's about 6 years before the passing of Walt Disney. So we can still see some of his ideas that are showing up in Disneyland. So what I'd like to do is take some time and just go through the attractions you could have seen had you visited the park in 1960. Like any good Disney fan, we're going to start on Main Street. Main Street, 1960 Disneyland, only had 3 real attractions. Disneyland, of course, had the Disneyland Railroad. Next on Main Street, you have the Main Street vehicles. This includes things such as the double-decker bus, the fire truck, horse-drawn trolley, and the Main Street Cinema. So, let's move on. Now, where to go next? Do we go left to Adventureland? Or do we go right to Tomorrowland? I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, but for me, traditionally, I've always gone to the left. So for our journey into Disneyland, we're going to continue my tradition, and we're going to go to the left. We're going to go to Adventureland. Adventureland, 1960, we have the Jungle Cruise. And that's pretty much it in Adventureland at the time. You may be asking yourself, well, what about the Enchanted Tiki Room? What about Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse? Those were still a few years away from opening. So the only attraction in Adventureland at the time was Jungle Cruise. Now we're going to take a brief moment just to pause here Adventureland, the Jungle Cruise attraction, Main Street, the railroad, Main Street Cinema, the Main Street vehicles, all of those are pretty much original attraction ideas. None of them are based on any movie. None of them are really based on any Disney IP. They are simply attractions that you could possibly find anywhere, at any theme park. So we're not going to count those as IP attractions. You see, kind of get where I'm going with this? Let's move on to Frontierland next. Frontierland had a lot more attractions. I'm just going to share them with you. There was the Shooting Exposition, just a shooting gallery basically. The Golden Horseshoe Review, which was a show. There was the Sailing Ship Columbia and the Mark Twain Riverboat, both of which sailed on the rivers of the Americas, I believe, at Disneyland. Also continuing into Frontierland, we had a stagecoach. We had a mine train through nature's wonderland. Don't get this confused with, say, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train or the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. This was not a roller coaster. It was just a sort of a small railroad that went through various attractions in Frontierland. There was a mule pack. You actually ride a mule in Frontierland. There was also Tom Sawyer Island, and of course one of my personal favorites, I'm sad that they're gone, the Mike Fink keel boats. All of these attractions were what you would have found in Frontierland in 1960. Now notice my list, we left off the canoes. You could actually ride a canoe as well in 1960 Disneyland. Again, we're going to take note. None of these attractions based on IP. None of these attractions based on a movie. We move from Frontierland into Fantasyland. But I'm actually going to skip Fantasyland if I could. We'll come back to it. Let's go over to Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland, you had attractions such as the House of the Future, the Bathroom of Tomorrow, and the Hall of Aluminum Fame. Not sure about any of those three attractions. You also had something called the Space Station X1. You have the Submarine Voyage. Of course, you have the Disneyland Monorail, the Rocket Jets, the Rocket to the Moon, and the Flight Circle. Let's take note again, none of them are based on any IP. None of them are based on any movie. Now let's go back to the one land we missed. And we're going to see something here that I think is very important to our discussion. Fantasyland, and one attraction or two attractions we need to go ahead and mention right away because they're shared between Tomorrowland and Fantasyland. There's the Skyway that you can take from Fantasyland to Tomorrowland and back. And there's also the Autopia, which is sort of in the middle between the two, and you can get on the Autopia in either Fantasyland or Tomorrowland. Neither of these, by the way, are based off of IP. Let's keep going in Fantasyland. There's the Casey Jr. Circus Train. So we see an IP here from Dumbo. The Mad Tea Party, based on Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter. Dumbo the Flying Elephant, definitely based off of IP, off of Dumbo. There's the Mickey Mouse Club Theater. There's Snow White's Scary Adventures, again, based off the attraction off the movie Snow White. There's the Sleeping Beauty Castle Walkthrough. Sleeping Beauty's castle, of course, based off of the movie Sleeping Beauty. The King Arthur Carousel, also roughly based off of Sleeping Beauty. You've got Peter Pan's Flight, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Both of those based on IP. You've got Skull Rock and Pirates Cove, sort of just a looking at attraction, I guess you'd say. Again, based off of Peter Pan. You've got the Storybook Land canal boats. These boats would take you on a tour through various stories and dioramas from various Disney movies. So very much based on Disney movies and IP. The motorboat cruise, and finally in Fantasyland, the Matterhorn bobsleds. Now, here's what I want you to understand. That is a total of 36 attractions in Disneyland at the time. Of those 36 attractions, 10 of them are based on IP. Every one of those movies, every one of those attractions is in Fantasyland. Frontierland, no IP. Tomorrowland, no IP. Adventureland, Main Street, no IP. I think that it's very important to take note of that. I think there is an unwritten rule or an unwritten code for Walt Disney that says IP represents movies. And the place where we see movies is Fantasyland. So we can do IP, movie-based rides, in Fantasyland, but let's keep them out of the rest of the park. Like I said, this is certainly not written down anywhere, certainly not set in stone, but I kind of think this may be what Walt had in mind based on the setup of Disneyland. For the interest of time, let's look quickly at Magic Kingdom in 1971 when they opened. And what we see is the Imagineers pretty much followed that same idea. Main Street, no IP. Go over to Adventureland, no IP. Possible exception of Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse. I kind of don't believe that's IP. I think that's more of a literary classic. We can debate that. Frontierland, no IP whatsoever. Liberty Square, no IP. Fantasyland, well, tons of IP. And I think it's important to note that if you look at Fantasyland, we have a submarine ride, much like they have in Tomorrowland. But in Fantasyland, they themed it to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, IP. And so they moved the submarine ride into Fantasyland because that's where IP rides dwelt. I think that's an important distinction. I'm going to go ahead and run with it. And then Tomorrowland, no IP in 1971. So let's jump ahead to today and see where we're at with IP in the parks. Did we keep IP in Fantasyland, or has it migrated out to other lands? Let's check. Well, Main Street, no IP. You have the Main Street vehicles, the cinema, pretty much nothing on Main Street, and the railroad, nothing on Main Street based on IP. Adventureland, we have now added the flying carpets of Aladdin, right in the middle. Basically a Dumbo knockoff. I'll tell you the truth, that is like my least favorite attraction in the entirety of the Magic Kingdom. I wish it weren't there because I liked the space that we had before. But anyway, moving to Frontierland, there is one attraction that's IP, or there was, Splash Mountain. Splash Mountain, of course, is now closed, but it's going to be replaced by Tiana's Bayou Adventure, which is based on IP. So we still have an IP attraction in Frontierland. Liberty Square has pretty much remained about unchanged since 1971, so no IP in Liberty Square. Fantasyland, tons of IP, but we expect it there. Now let's move over to Tomorrowland. I mentioned in my technology video a while back, Tomorrowland is kind of a land with an identity crisis. Tomorrowland's supposed to represent the future, but the future is coming so fast that Tomorrowland can't keep up with it. And Imagineers have struggled to figure out what to do with Tomorrowland. So let's kind of look at Tomorrowland. First of all, there are the 5 classic attractions that have been there just about since day one: Space Mountain, Carousel of Progress, the People Mover, Astro Orbiter, and of course the Grand Prix Raceway. And then let's look at the attractions that have been added in the last, 20 years or so, 15, 20 years or so. There's Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, based on an IP. There's the Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor, based on an IP. And then, of course, there's opening in April, Tron's Light Cycle Run, based on IP. So the newest attractions at the Magic Kingdom in Tomorrowland have been based on IP. But again, Tomorrowland, I think Imagineers are trying to figure out exactly what to do with it and how to make it relevant. So, what would Walt think now? I think he would wish that there was less IP attractions outside of Fantasyland. However, there are, 5 total attractions based on IP away from Fantasyland. 3 in Tomorrowland, 1 in Adventureland, 1 in Frontierland. And I think overall Walt would say, that's okay. We can deal with that. So the Magic Kingdom, I feel like Walt would look at it and say, this looks pretty good. Walt also might look at it and say, times have changed. The park has to change. Some of this IP, for example, I know I am looking forward to riding Tron's Light Cycle Run. I'm excited about it, even though it is based on IP. So perhaps a change in times, maybe Walt would say, okay. What do you think? Leave me a comment, subscribe below, like this video, tell me what you think. All this talk of the Magic Kingdom has me wishing I was actually there. Guys, thanks again for watching. Again, leave me a comment, subscribe to this channel, and I look forward to seeing you at Disney World.